presentation here. There it is. So I'm sharing the screen with you, which means that you can see the same screen that I can see. And so the title of the book, which came out 5 years ago, is Being a Bird in North America, North of Mexico. That was kind of a long-winded way of saying Canada and the United States, including Alaska, but excluding Hawaii. And if anybody's interested in purchasing a copy of the book, at the bottom you can see my, can you see this, the cursor here going around? Yeah.
Yes.
That's my email. So if you do want to purchase a copy, they're $40, including shipping from my place and tax. And if you just email me, I can. What's that? Go ahead. Maybe I talked over myself. Okay. So this book actually represents the 5th phase in my evolution of capturing species. I started capturing species when I was about 12, when I was born and not born, but raised in Greece. And I had a pellet rifle, which I used to shoot things, sometimes live and sometimes not living. And I got tired of that after about a year or two. I decided that I didn't want to kill things anymore. I grew up sort of on my own. Nobody told me that it was bad to be shooting things. Nobody even knew what I was doing. But anyway, I brought the pellet rifle back to the store where I had bought it and asked them if they would take it and give me some money for it, and they did. And I used that money to buy a pair of used binoculars from a friend of mine. So that was my 2nd phase, where I became observer / photographer. And then when I went to university, I went to Queens. I studied loons in my 5th year for my thesis, and then the 4th phase came later during my work in Quebec City and in Ottawa. I developed conservation status ranks for a lot of groups of species, especially vertebrates. So for example, all the fish of Quebec, including the marine species, and then all the birds of Canada. And that's kind of a quick and dirty way of figuring out whether a species is common or not, whether it's a species at risk or whether it's an invasive species. You can just go through the 400 or the 600 species of that group in the jurisdiction you're looking at and assign these conservation status ranks. And you might know about COSEWIC status reports. So that's when you want a lot more detailed information on the species to come up with a determination of species at risk. And then, so I did that for a few years. And then number 5, the BABINA approach is what we'll see now in the book. So my goals were one, to reach a broad audience. People would always say, well, who's your audience? Who's your audience? Who's your audience? I'd always say it's a broad audience. And they never seemed to be satisfied with that. But in the end, it turned out to be a very wide audience. And birders are not even necessarily the first audience. Although I thought so at first, that's why I listed them first. Birders, naturalists, biologists, people with bird feeders, students, whoever has any sort of interest in nature. My second goal was to give the reader an interesting and fun way to remember each species and each issue. And so I'll be talking in a couple of minutes about what I actually discussed for each species. And then the third goal was to use birds as a test case for other elements of biodiversity, like other vertebrates or insects or all life forms. In other words, if I could do a book like this on birds, would it work for any other life forms? And I haven't gotten that far yet. I've only gotten to volume 1 of what was going to be a 3-volume set on the birds, and that's all I've done. That took me 12 years. So I'm probably not going to be continuing to do volumes 2, volumes 3, and then volumes on other other forms of life. Although I would really welcome if somebody else decided to do that. I'd certainly give them a hand. So the main features of the book, what are the most interesting aspects of each species? Whatever they happen to be, whether they're tricks for survival, whether they're problems they face, whether they're ecological questions, whether they're birding considerations or unanswered questions, anything that applies to the species, any aspect that applies to the species, what are the most interesting ones? And that's what I want to talk about in the account for each species. There are cartoons from 15 different artists, 1 cartoon per page, per species page. Global distribution maps, so a map of the world showing the birds' distribution. Number 4 is nature served conservation status ranks. So that's what I was talking about just a couple of minutes ago. I did global ranks for some groups, and I did national ranks for all the vertebrates in Canada except the fish. And then for Quebec, I did all the vertebrates in Canada. The AOU, the American Ornithologists Union, I used their taxonomy, their nomenclature, and their species ordering. You have to decide with birds because there are different taxonomies that have been adopted for birds, for the birds of the world, for example. So they don't all necessarily agree. Some of them are strong with subspecies, and some of them don't even treat subspecies. And then there are quotations from Arthur Cleveland Bent's Life Histories of North American Birds, which is a wonderful series of books published between 1919 and 1968, giving basically everything that was known up to that point with regard to the life histories of each North American species. That was about a 20-volume set. And but because it was written sort of in the old days, most of it was anyway, 1919, some of the language was just beautiful, really nice. North America I defined as Canada and the US without Hawaii, but including Alaska. You know, North America can mean different things to different people. So that's the way I defined it, because I wanted to treat the species that I knew best, the species in Canada and the US. We gave Spanish names for each species for use in Mexico. So in the various Spanish-speaking countries, some of them have more than one species list for birds. And so the names aren't even in the same within one country, much less from one country to another. And then we also gave the French names. That was pretty easy because there's one standard for the French names. And then there's an appendix at the end that completes the list of and status of North American birds. I should just mention, are you still there, Jacob? No?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, I was just wondering, we didn't discuss this at all, but in terms of if people have questions, I'm perfectly fine. In fact, I think it would be better if I stopped every now and then and just opened it up for 1 or 2 questions and then go back. Would that work for you?
That's fine. The other thing people can do is, if you have questions, as you have them, just put them in the chat. And then when we pause, I can read them out of the chat. And it might be a little more orderly than everybody talking over each other.
Will I be able to read them from the chat as well? Will I see the chat?
I believe you can. It should be available at the bottom of the screen, but I've got it, so it's.
So does anybody have any questions right now? Okay. So let's go on. I want to show you a typical page. So this is a typical species page with its 4 corners and central material. So the top left here is the name of the species in English, the scientific name, French name, the Spanish name for Mexico, and then the order and family that the species belongs to. In the top right, we have the cartoon that illustrates the major point, usually, of the account. So it's discussed in the account. In the bottom left, we have a range map of the entire world. So in this particular range map here, you can see the red, which is in the prairies and up in the James Bay lowlands. So that's where they breed. And then these blue areas are where they winter. And were this species to occur all year round somewhere in between, then that would be purple. And then here in the bottom right, we've got the NatureServe conservation status. Now, what's interesting about the conservation status of NatureServe is that it's done like at 3 different geographic levels. A species can be secure or at risk at the global level, or at the US, Canada, or Mexico level. So those would be national levels, and even at the state and provincial levels. And those 3 ranks together give you a real good indication of what the conservation status is, because you're looking at it at 3 different geographic scales. So that's kind of the first part of the talk. The second part of the talk is I want to go through some of the cartoons with you, and maybe do some readings as well. You want to try, let's see if we can try, for people who were not at my talk on about 4 years ago for the OFNC, can you tell me what this species is and what's going on? And I guess you can just chat it. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be vocal. Anyone? Any guesses? No? So
we've got 2 guesses actually. We've got 1 guess of wild turkey and 1 guess of, I think that's supposed to say spruce grouse, and autocorrect took that over. Spruce grouse.
And it is indeed the spruce grouse.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll read you a little bit from the species account. The spruce grouse, and this is quoting from Arthur Cleveland Bent, 1932. The spruce grouse remains so woefully ignorant of the destructive nature of the human animal that, unlike its cousin, the ruffed grouse, it rarely learns to fly, to run or fly away, but allows itself to be shot, clubbed, or noosed, and in consequence has earned for itself the proud title of fool hen, the fool hen. As a result, wherever man appears, the spruce grouse rapidly diminishes in numbers, and in the vicinity of villages or outlying posts is not to be found. And that was from Bent, 1932. So that's what I figured was sort of the first thing somebody might think of when they think of the spruce grouse, if they've seen it in the wild, that it just stands there and looks at you and thinks that it's hiding. It thinks that you can't see it. And I'd like to mention here that this particular drawing was done by Kevin Wallace, who is here in Ottawa. Some of you might know him. He's the manager of Max Skimming and the other outdoor education center. He did very sort of violent cartoons. Any idea what's going on here? Again, you can use your chat or what species we're talking about. You got anything, Jacob?
I give people a second to type. I don't. Oh, killdeer. Is it
Okay.
a killdeer?
Yeah. Did they say anything else about it?
No, just two guesses of killdeer. Who knows what's happening? Oh, distraction display to lure fox away from nest.
Excellent. Excellent.
Thanks,
So I'll
Bev.
read you a little bit about, sorry, Jacob.
Nope, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll read you a little bit about the killdeer. All plovers use distraction displays to lure intruders away from the nest or chicks, but the species that most often fools humans with this age-old trick, also known as the broken wing act, is the killdeer. And in quotes from Bent 1929, all plovers, one wing was held extended over the back, the other beat wildly in the dust. The tail feathers were spread and the bird lay flat on the ground, constantly giving a wild alarm note. This performance continued until the observer came very near, when the bird would rise and run along the ground in a normal manner, or at most with one wing dragging slightly as long as pursuit was continued. If the observer turned back toward the nest, however, these actions were immediately repeated. When the parents had succeeded in luring the intruder about 100 yards, they seemed satisfied as they then flew away. A killdeer may also pretend to incubate eggs or brood chicks on the ground away from the nest, leading predators to believe that the nest lies under it rather than yonder. And that was from Jackson and Jackson 2000. So that's the killdeer. I assume most of the people here today have seen killdeers because they're pretty common, and all you would have had to do really would have been to go to Blues Fest 2 years ago, and you would have seen a nest where they wanted to put a stage. Does anybody remember that? Okay, this one's a little bit of a different different style of cartoon. Can anybody guess what this is? And I don't want people who were at my presentation 4 years ago to answer. I want to see if new people can answer.
Okay, Jose says bittern.
She doesn't say what kind of bittern.
Christina also says bittern and also didn't say what kind of bittern.
Bittern it is.
Oh, American. Oh, they both specified American now.
Is that Christina Lewis?
No, Christina Marchand and Jose's. It says Jose's iPad.
Okay, because Christina Lewis did more cartoons than anybody than the other 14 cartoonists. One of many fantastic cartoonists. So this is indeed the American bittern, which is a marsh bird. If you spent all your time in a marsh and wanted to communicate over a long distance with someone whom you couldn't see through the dense vegetation, you would likely find it easier to do so by using low frequency sounds rather than high frequency ones. Indeed, the American bittern is a large marsh dweller that vocalizes to mates and other individuals during the breeding season using low resonant calls described as pumperlunk or dunkadoo, or you guys hear that? My imitation of an American bittern. These notes have been likened to the sound made by an old wooden pump in action. So that's the American bittern. Any questions coming up?
Let's see. Bev says she heard a bittern just now. I think she was complimenting your glug glug sound.
Thanks,
My
Bev.
best one is glug glug. Let's see. Oh, just see guesses. Thumbs up, Bev. Thank you. Don't see any questions.
Okay, so let's go on to the next one, which is a very interesting story about a species that made it, well, on its own to the New World from the Old World. Anybody know what this is?
Multiple guesses of cattle egret.
Yeah,
Already.
that's it. So this is the only bird that has both crossed to the New World from the Old World without direct help from humans, and phenomenally expanded its numbers and breeding range. Cattle egrets probably crossed the Atlantic Ocean from Africa to South America in the late 1800s, likely using the shortest route, and arrived in North America in the early 1940s. They continue to move northward, sorry. Renowned, and are even in parts of southern Canada. Renowned wanderers, they couldn't colonize the New World until cattle ranching became widespread. Because in its original African foraging habitat of shortgrass meadow, it followed moving of African buffaloes, which stir up insects. The cattle egret now uses many hosts, even ostriches and tortoises. It often perches on the host's back or whips sedentary ones into action by making restless flights nearby. So although a number of bird species are invasive, are introduced species, and a number of them are invasive, like the rock pigeon, the European starling, and the house sparrow, they didn't make it on their own, but they did, like the cattle egret, spread very widely in the New World. So this is the only species, the cattle egret, that actually made it here on its own, and waited until an opportune time when this large-scale farming started to start perching on cows and looking for their food there. This is the only cartoon that actually has two frames. And I'm wondering whether anybody knows what it is, or what's going on here. I'll give you a hint. Two species are shown in each frame. Anything?
Nothing yet.
Nothing yet? Give them a couple more seconds.
Yeah.
So when I gave this presentation 4 years ago for the OFNC, everybody in the room was stumped, except for this kid who was 12. And he knew what the species were and exactly what was going on. His mother later came by and bought him a copy of the book for his birthday, which was coming up. A really advanced kid. So in the top frame, you've got a duck sitting there with a smile on her face. She's incubating her eggs. Well, I'll read it to you. Slough means pond out west, like as in prairie pothole. All of the slough nesting ducks, and this is from Bent 1923, seem to be very careless about laying their eggs in the nests of other species. Really careless. Poor Bent would be kicking himself now, for we know he was at the cusp of understanding a sneaky game that has been going on every spring in perhaps the least appreciated yet very rich North American habitat. Redhead females are actually very careful to lay their eggs in nests of other ducks, especially canvasbacks, to allow the latter to raise the yellow redhead ducklings along with their own brown ones. The trick is called non-obligate brood parasitism. Unlike brown-headed cowbirds, which lay their eggs only in the nests of other species, redheads aren't obliged to. They lay eggs in their own nests too. Other aquatic bird species are also involved in this battle in North America's duck factory as parasites, as hosts, or both. So part of the reason why nobody piped up is because it's a Western species. It does occur to there are a few breeding in Quebec and a few breeding in Ontario, but they're not common at all. They're really a prairie species, the redhead, and so is the canvasback. So the canvasback is the one with the Roman nose in the top frame with the eyes closed and the Roman nose, whereas the redhead is the one putting the, placing her egg under the canvasback.
Got a good question from Penelope Adams. Does this change with food supply?
The degree to which they use one method or another?
Yeah.
No idea. No idea. Good question. And in some cases, the same female will use both techniques. So she'll make her own nest, lay her own eggs in her own nest, but she'll also lay other eggs here and there in the nests of other females, especially canvasbacks. Any other questions?
Just that one at the moment.
Okay. So this next one is simply an identification guide based on identification of these two species. So this is the lesser Scop, which is a diving duck. And I asked Quebec biologist Michel Robert how to distinguish between the lesser and greater Scops. Head shape, he said in French. The greater's head looks round, whereas the lesser's looks like it's been whacked from behind. Kevin Wallace nicely portrays the image that has remained fixed in my memory for more than 20 years. I told you that Kevin Wallace's cartoons tend to be what's the word I'm looking for? Violent. So this is a nighttime scene. Anybody have any idea what species this is, or even what group of species it's from? Like, they're not ducks, but they are aquatic birds. They're actually marine.
Bev guesses storm petrel?
Yes, yes, indeed. So it's Leeches storm petrel. And what I thought most interesting about this, again, came from Bent. Imagine camping in the middle of a petrel colony without knowing it. The ground below you would be riddled with burrows containing nests with incubating birds or lone young, and you could easily overlook the entrances, which are usually surrounded by vegetation. And quoting from Bent 1922, it is a weird experience to spend a night in a petrel colony during the breeding season. Night is their season of activity, birds coming and going all the time, hardly discernible in the darkness, uttering their loud and peculiar cries as they call to or greet their mates. It is a wonder that the incoming birds can find their mates or their burrows in the darkness and the confusion of thousands of fluttering birds. Experiments have shown that they use their sense of smell. There was nothing to indicate that beneath our feet lay a buried sea, teeming with life, a city of storm waifs gathered from an expanse of 1,000 watery leagues. Most people never see petrels, but birders do on specially organized pelagic boat trips. So that's the Leeches storm petrel, and it breeds on a lot of the northern coasts in the world, including our eastern and western coasts. Any questions here?
Nothing yet. We can carry on.
Okay. Macho mallard. Any idea what's going on here?
Doesn't look like it.
Doesn't look like it, okay. So males with their unique upward curving back central tail feathers abandon their incubating mates and gather in small flocks to molt into eclipse or concealing plumage, as in the cartoon. Unlike many other birds which wear a breeding plumage in spring and summer and a non-breeding plumage in fall and winter, ducks wear a breeding plumage in winter and spring and an eclipse plumage for a short time in summer. Given their high weight to wing surface area ratio, the loss of only a few feathers would make them flightless. So it makes sense to shed them all at once to reduce the flightless period during which they hide in emergent vegetation, just like in the cartoon. Aquatic birds such as waterfowl, loons, grebes, aningas, and even dippers can tolerate being flightless during molt because they can flee from predators by diving. Many terrestrial birds would be in big trouble if rendered flightless. So that's what the males are doing. They're basically just getting away. They're done with the females in spring, and they're going and hiding in the reeds and playing cards, smoking cigarettes, and drinking beer, just like good Ontarians. Anything here, y'all? Because I should mention that at 19 million breeding birds, the mallard is one of the world's best known waterfowl. It is the most widely distributed, most abundant, and most heavily hunted duck in North America, where its population has cycled from 5 million to 11 million since 1955. Modern waterfowl management here in North America is currently based largely on what is known about this species, the mallard. It can thrive in a wide range of landscapes, often in close contact with humans. It is the source of all domestic ducks, except for the Muscovy duck. It is being bred selectively to maximize meat or egg production, to be used as live decoys, or to experiment with colorful plumages. Many shapes, sizes, and color combinations have thus been created. Feral populations, composed of mixtures of wild mallards and domesticated breeds, live in urban areas throughout the world where they habituate to humans who feed them. Mallards hybridize with closely related species, for example, the American black duck and the mottled ducks in North America, thus reducing the pure quality of those species' genetic identity, and there are 7 species that it does that with. So it's actually a problem species. It's not considered to be invasive in most places, or it's not considered to be. It is considered to be invasive in a lot of spaces, but it's a native species pretty much everywhere in the world, I think. So there are a few hints in this one as to what this bird is. Anybody want to guess? That'd be much appreciated.
We have a guess of yellow rail.
Yes. How many people guess?
1. Bev.
Bev again? Okay. Right you are. The rare yellow rail has provided some of my favorite ornithological experiences. In the 1990s, Canadian Wildlife Service biologist Michel Robert hired me to co-write a national status report with him. It was a perfect occasion for learning about the species. Later, a calling male was heard near Quebec City, and Michel needed gut samples for a diet study. Armed with a bright lamp, a net, and 2 stones for imitating its typewriter-like tick, 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 tick call, we caught the bird. By injecting the harmless fluid tartar emetic down its throat, we obtained a gut sample for food analysis. I couldn't believe the bird's tiny size. On another occasion, we used a hunting dog trained with yellow rail scent to look for nests. Doing this during the day, I appreciated the very shallow nature of the water in the rail habitat and its susceptibility to being drained by humans. Now, years later, I visited Manitoba's Douglas Marsh, a well-known breeding site. After 5 weeks of birding alone, I was curious to see another person. He looked preoccupied. What a coincidence. It was Bruce DeLabio, a birding guide from my hometown of Ottawa, playback machine in hand, trying to coax out a yellow rail after having had success with the Nelson sparrow. He was scouting good birds through southern Manitoba, prairie potholes, etc., for his tour the next day. He told me the fascinating story of yellow rails calling along with the tick, 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 tick of the night train traveling through Richmond Fen, south of Ottawa. And recently, Fred Heliner, also of Ontario, wrote of an incident from some decades ago when one bird created a stir when its repetitive ticking noises behind a gas station in northern Ontario became the subject of a police investigation, perhaps a time bomb. So that's my last that's my last slide. I just want to say that there are a lot of people that were that one might want to acknowledge here. If you just consider, there were about 80 photographers who supplied photos. There were 15 cartoonists. There was one map maker. There was a fellow from Mexico who came up with the Spanish bird names for use in Mexico. Thank NatureServe for providing their ranks, their conservation status ranks. In fact, I had done a lot of those ranks for them, but it was using their system, which was very good and still is very good. And there are a number of other people that that I'd be able to thank as well. But so they're all listed in the book. So I'd like to open it up to questions. Do we keep using the texting, or can we open it up for people to talk?
Someone's comfortable. I think there's I see 27 people right now. So if you want to just ask. And if everyone ends up talking at once, I'll pick someone. So we got a text question. Or a comment, I guess. Louis Larive is saying he read a review of your book, which was hoping to see a volume 2 published. I'd agree. It's I really enjoy the book. It's really good. Another question: what are your plans for volumes 2 and 3? And someone's wondering if you're a full-time biologist.
So the last question is easy. Yeah, I'm pretty much a full-time biologist, although I'm semi-retired. In terms of volumes 2 and 3, I never imagined that volume 1 could take 12 years. So I'm not going to do volumes 2 and 3. It was just way too much. But you know, as it turns out, I'm pretty pleased that the scientific order is the way it is, and that I followed it. So in other words, the book starts with all the waterfowl. There are about 43 species of ducks, geese, and swans. And then it goes through a whole bunch more non-passerines. So generally big birds that are in diverse groups. Whereas what we're not getting here are the dicky birds. Generally speaking, we're not getting the small stuff like the sparrows, the vireos, the waxwings, the warblers. Those are the ones that we're not getting. So yeah, I'm not planning to do volumes 2 or 3, but I may do another printing of this volume 1. Now that brings up another point. You mentioned Louis Larive. Louis Larive.
He's listening.
Yeah, he's listening. He, I saw him earlier. He was the first one to point out an error in the book. And he saw me at the Bytown Theater. He stood up and he yelled over to me, "Rob, I found an error in your book." I said, what was it? He said, "The wild turkey map is wrong." I said, "Okay, I'll have to check that out when I go home." So ever since that, and that was about 4 years ago, the only error that has been pointed out again and again is this one. So to me, it's a pretty good indication that maybe there is just one error, since about 6 people came up with it. So I'm indebted to Louis for coming up with that.
I think a book with only one error might be a record. So a couple other questions here. Okay, Dr. Meister wants to know, what are Canada geese gaggling about? Any idea?
What are they gaggling about?
Yeah.
Well, in the gaggling or cackling?
He said gaggling.
Gaggling. Well, this gives me an opportunity to tell you quickly about the Canada goose versus the cackling goose. So originally, back in the last century, there were considered to be about 13 subspecies of Canada geese. And eventually, after a lot of toing and froing, it was decided that all the little ones, there were four subspecies, would be called the cackling goose and be broken off away from the Canada goose. So what are they cackling about? If you look at the cackling goose drawing, what they're cackling about is the fact that this one goose in the class of 2004 full species graduation, he made it to full species. And these Canada geese are looking around in dismay because they figure he's just a little version of us. In the Canada goose, just facing the cackling goose page is the Canada goose page. And the Canada goose page, what they're cackling about is where to migrate to, which way is south or which way is north. But if the questioner has a better answer, maybe that would be interesting.
So next question is from Jose. She missed some of the info. Where can the book be purchased?
So the book can be purchased through me at this email. It's $40, and that includes me mailing it to you in Ottawa. And it includes tax and the cost of shipping, the $40, well, $40 does.
So Bev would like to know, if you could choose one more taxonomic group to do, which one would you choose?
Uh-huh. If I could choose another taxonomic group, it would be habitats, natural communities, because they're so often ignored by the species by species approach. So in other words, we would talk about this particular kind of forest, or this particular kind of maple forest, or this particular kind of field, or this particular kind of cliff, or alvar, or scree. There are all kinds of different habitats, but we haven't standardized them. They're working on it, but it's been pretty slow. It started in the year 2000, and it's called, if anybody's interested, it's called the CNVC, the Canadian National Vegetation Classification.
Well, that's that would interest me quite a bit. I like that stuff. Just in case, Bev says that would be great, but I thought she meant if there was a taxonomic group of birds that you hadn't covered.
Maybe the woodpeckers, just because I just think woodpeckers are really neat, and there are a whole bunch of them in North America. There may be, I don't know, 10, 15 species in Canada and the US.
They're certainly ripe for amusing cartoons.
A pair of what?
They'd certainly be ripe for amusing cartoons.
Yes, yeah. Thanks, Bev.
Any suggestions for a good place to hear nightbirds in Ottawa?
Yes. The Thomas Dolan Parkway, I think, is the best place I know. When you go between, what does it link? It links the Old Carp Road at the south end with, I can't think of the road in the north end. But as you get into it's only several kilometers long, and there's some farming going on there. But it seems to be very good for whippoorwills in June and July, and common
Nighthawk?
Nighthawk, thanks. Yeah. In terms of owls, I don't think there are any particular places for owls in general. I think it's kind of the best way to see owls would be during the day in the West End in Canada, and unfortunately the sightings are not publicized by the OFNC, because a lot of people mistreat the owls. They feed them lab rats so they can get really good photographs. But probably the best place overall for owls within 2 hours of here, 2.5 hours, is Wolf Island and is it Wolf? No, Amherst Island, sorry. And there's a site there that's managed by the Kingston Field Naturalists, and it's excellent in winter. In 1978, I think there were 11 species of owls in the woods there, in the woods and the areas around. I think that covers most of the nocturnal species.
Let's see. Lynn says somebody should do this for plants. Any interest in doing this for plants?
Me or someone else?
Well, I'd ask you first, I guess. You, just to clarify, Rob, you said you're not interested in doing the future volumes, but you'd assist someone that was. So you're saying if someone wants to take up the torch and complete the set here, that you'd help them with that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It'd be a huge undertaking.
Okay. And so starlings are not in the book, right? Martha was asking if you have starlings, but I believe you don't get to them.
Only native species, and starlings are an invasive old world species, so it's not treated in the book.
And also there's a question on what exactly was wrong with that turkey map, but Louis answered it in the chat. Louis all over that turkey map. Yeah, okay. So if you guys have questions about the purchase of the books, anything surrounding that, I'd suggest you just email Rob and ask for those. And we've got a bunch of people saying thank you and they enjoyed the talk. Not seeing any new questions.
Thanks for attending.